Welcome to Pete's Property Podcast, brought to you by Buyers and hosted by Pete Wargent, buyer's agent, finance and real estate expert, and all-round property guru, plus published author. Join Pete for 30 minutes as he chats all things property with a new guest each week. Learn practical tips from the movers and shakers in the property industry and well-known personalities sharing their property journeys.
G'day, welcome to this week's episode of the Pete Wargent Property Pod. I'm extra excited this week to have a super special guest, Michael Bevan, down in Sydney today. G'day, Michael. Great to have you on the show. How's it going?
Going well, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on.
We've got a few things in common. A love of cricket, of course, but also an interest in property and probably, in my case anyway, a bit of a coffee addiction. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us a bit about your background, because I think you were born in the ACT, which is not a territory known for its state cricket, of course. So why were you in the ACT and how did you even get into cricket, being that you were based over there?
I think I'm the first player from the ACT to have played for Australia. I think when I first started playing and as a youngster going through the ranks, I think we had maybe one or two guys that had played fringe shield cricket. So it was a bit of a mountain for me to climb to sort of reach my goal and dream of playing for Australia, given the pedigree of ACT cricket and given how little it featured in the landscape, I suppose, of young cricketers. I've always viewed myself as a sportsman. I was sort of gifted at most sports growing up and sort of played soccer, cricket, athletics, volleyball, basketball, you name it. I loved playing it, tennis. And I suppose from an academic perspective, I would say I was an average student. So, you know, I sort of saw playing sport for a living as a natural progression and doing something that I loved. And look, about the age of 16, I suppose I had to make a decision on which sport I wanted to continue to play and maybe devote a bit more time to. And given cricket was the major pastime as a sport for a lot of Australians, I kind of went down that path.
So what about your? What did your parents do? Were they in favour of a sporting career? Because I guess thinking back to my schooling and academic career, that we were always encouraged to get qualifications and study hard and whatnot. But were your parents in favour of a sporting career?
I think probably pretty neutral. I can recall my dad definitely having, not sort of being blunt, but truthful. I was at that point in time, I was a fast bowler and I was sort of all of 4'6", I reckon. And he was kind of happy to mention that there weren't too many bowlers that bowled for Australia that were over 6 foot. So I'm never going to reach that. Obviously, there was guys like Malcolm Marshall around, which were probably exception to the norm. So I would say, neither here nor there in terms of either sort of encouraging or discouraging. And I wasn't really going to be dissuaded by previous history or what people were going to say. It was just sort of a bit of a bugbear and a bit of a passion. And I suppose I just always said to myself, look, I'm going to give this a crack. I'd like to give it a good go. And if it works out, great. And if not, I sort of had my cut-off points. I thought, look, by the age of 27, if I haven't played for Australia yet, I'll give it away and find a proper job. And look, I think I sort of was top 30%, probably could have snuck in for a Bachelor of Arts, probably most likely in the field of PE if I wanted to go that direction, but you're notoriously bad at following things that I don't have a passion for. And so that route was always going to be difficult, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's always interesting when it comes to sporting careers, because you spend all of those, thousands of hours practicing and then years and years playing the sport. And then when people put up sort of quick info profiles or Wikipedia profiles, always seems to get distilled down to just a few things that people are remembered for, or a few key moments. And I guess probably one of the things you're remembered for is changing the face of one-day international cricket, particularly being able to bat to the end of the innings. And I'm thinking of a famous old quote, which I think was attributed to the Formula One champion, Juan Manuel Fangio, where he said, to finish first you've got to finish. Or he probably said it in Argentinian, but I guess there's a bit of dispute about who first said it. But I guess the idea is that, like in F1, you focus intensely on winning the Grand Prix, but if you don't finish the race, you've got no hope of actually winning it. And I suppose the same principle applies to a lot of what you do in life. So I guess you became known as the finisher in one-day international cricket, and to some degree revolutionised the way in which people played. Was that intentional, or was that just something that evolved in your game over time?
Yeah, well, it was intentional in terms of the way I played. It wasn't intentional in terms of the results that I expected to achieve. I really didn't evolve. It just happened naturally for me. And so I didn't set out to become known as the finisher. And like, in all honesty, my career, what I thought might look like at the end was nowhere near what the reality suggested or looked like. And it went in a different direction. I was kind of hopeful that I would play 100 tests for my country, and it ended up being just one hell of a challenge for me, which can be good and bad to a degree as well. And so you're right. I suppose during my career I was doing everything possible, with the exception of obviously playing and performing, to be known as a test player as opposed to a one-day player. Obviously, test was a huge focus back then. One day in short form cricket hadn't quite made the transition to the hearts and minds of, the cricketing public and the fans. And so, yes, it happened by default, and it happened by chance. And I just got to the stage where I was a natural at number 6 and finishing games, and it was completely comfortable to me. And so when people talk about this flow that you get in, whereas a lot of people felt pressure, I just sort of had a clear map and felt responsible and obligated and, comfortable sort of finishing matches. And so it was.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of key life lessons there. You can make all the plans you want in life, but things will always change direction. I suppose the important thing is to keep moving forward. But I guess you can also use that finisher concept in life in general. I guess try and think what you want to achieve in your later years, and ensure you work and channel your energy towards those things now. Now, I had a question that I'd scripted, and I was going to ask, what was your best or most memorable moments in cricket? Because I guess the thing that people possibly on a personal level would remember you most for is the famous last ball boundary in front of a full house at the SCG against the West Indies that you mentioned just before. But I guess for sheer heart-stopping elation, it's got to be hard to go past the World Cup semi-final against South Africa in 1999. I actually attended some of that World Cup, unfortunately not that specific game. And I was going to say, well, there was this famous photo with all 11 Aussie players in it. And when we jumped on the podcast to record, lo and behold, there it was behind you. So would therefore that be a fair comment that that's the most memorable moment in cricket for you?
One of them, for sure, and particularly from a team perspective, and more broadly speaking, that was my favourite World Cup, simply because of the hardships and the battles we had to climb to win it. And at the time, because I think that was the first year that they maybe introduced the Super Sixes or a version of it, and what it effectively meant, we had in the formative rounds, we had 2 losses, I think, from memory. We'd come off, the back of a sort of a turbulent period, particularly with Warney and maybe Steve Waugh and the selectors around that time. And we probably weren't in the best space as a team. We lost the first couple. And that effectively meant, I think we had to win 7 matches in a row to win the World Cup. in pressure cooker moments, situations and matches against the best in the world. And at that point in time, we were still sort of making the transition from a sort of a good, solid one-day cricket team to what effectively we would become the best in the world. And at that point, we'd only ever won 3 matches in a row. And so that was definitely one of my favourite moments in my cricketing career. And it's quite funny. I mean, at the end of that match, we got off the field, and usually when you just win super tight matches, everyone's just jumping off the seats and going crazy and back slapping, et cetera, and you're breaking out the boos real quick. And honestly, we got back in the change rooms and it was just stunned silence for probably 5 or 10 minutes, where everyone just sort of absorbed and soaked in what had happened, what we'd done, and what it meant, et cetera. And that particular game, look, at times when you bowl and bat, you get nervous, depending on. I think it was the only game in my life where I was fielding out in the boundary and I was actually nervous given the situation and what was going on. So yeah, look, it was a favourite. It was a favourite match for me for sure.
Yeah, I mean, time dulls the memory. This is over 20 years ago now, but I think I might be right in saying the match was actually tied, but because of the rules of the tournament, that was enough to see you guys through to the final. And then, I remember England had written a team song, I think, for the tournament, but they were dusted out of the competition before they even got to release the release the song. So, and I think, there was a bit of weather around from memory, and Australia struggled early on. And then, as you said, 7 games in a row to take out the title. So I guess those would be a couple of the big high moments of your career. Do you have any regrets? Or I suppose probably a better question is, are there any things you would do differently if you were starting out again today?
Yeah, I had quite a few low moments. Most of them revolved around being dropped from the Australian Test team. But when I kind of look at my career, I try not to. It was a very good learn. Like, I'm kind of notoriously stubborn and not a great learner at the best of times. But so it kind of took me a while to learn my lessons about my cricket and myself. And the only reasons I really did that was being dropped multiple times from the Australian Test team and going through hardships and, having a real close, hard look at, who I was and what I was doing. And so I don't have any regrets, because at the time I kind of changed things eventually for the better and had a far more beneficial approach to my game from the age of 27. And once I sort of made some changes and learned about myself and my game, I kind of put them in place and improved the number of runs I scored, improved my average. And so when I look back on my career, I mean, it actually becomes a fond memory and one of the things that I'm really proud of, that I sort of faced down being, pretty low at times and came back and became a better player. And it probably doesn't show in terms of Test cricket and the games I played. But as a player, that was and as a person, that was one of the things that I, felt really good about and proud of my career. So I wouldn't change anything. If I went back now, I would probably do things slightly different. Whether or not they'd work out or not, I'm not sure. I'd probably know what to do, but you are who you are, and whether you can make sort of wholesale changes is another question. So yeah, no, look, I don't have any real regrets. I made mistakes. I eventually learnt from them. I became a better player, and I'm sort of happy to say that it's impacted my life and at the time my career for the better. So yeah, no, look, I had plenty of low periods, but in the end, I sort of always came out the other side.
Yeah, so we'll come on to talk about property just in a second. I've got one other cricket-related question, and that is, do you miss being in the limelight full time? Because I guess from the outside, these days, it seems that being a public figure increasingly seems to be a double-edged sword, what with the media and social media and all the other stuff that goes with it. What advice would you give to a youngster starting out in cricket or sport today?
Well, look, I don't miss the limelight at all. I'm probably more introverted than extroverted. And one of the things that I realised, and you learn about the public when you're in the public eye and you're playing for your country, is that generally there's no middle ground. People either love you or they hate you, and it's something that you really have to manage, and so it doesn't affect either you or your performance. And so it is an interesting concept, as sort of the notoriety and being in the public. And I remember sort of going for a beer when Slats was living in Manly a couple of years ago, going for a beer with him, and he's still, extremely famous because of his commentary roles. And people would inevitably know Slats far more than they knew me, so I sort of slipped into incognito. But in terms of young players coming through, it's quite strange because cricket is quite, not so much now with Big Bash, but because they get quite a few people to their games. But when I was growing up and playing state cricket, we had no one to our games. And so you'd go from playing actually, a very high standard for your state in world cricket with no one watching, to then having 40,000 people watching you in a stadium and having 2 million people watch on TV, and then walking down the street and everyone stopping you. And it is quite tough I found that one of the more difficult things to deal with. So I think for a young person coming through, it's one more thing that you need to sort of keep an eye on or expect if you do in fact want to sort of achieve your goals, play a high level or a standard of cricket for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and as you said, I think the media like to polarize and heroes and villains, and it, as you said, people are complicated, and there's usually some good and bad and a middle ground, but of course that doesn't sell stories. Let's talk a bit about your real estate journey. I read a lot of autobiographies and sports biographies and so on, and one of the common stories you read, and this is true across baseball and football, basketball, is that a lot of particularly the high-performing sportsmen have very high incomes during their peak earning years, and of course, at some point, that's going to drop off. But they find it hard to wind back their spending, and then something happens down the track and it ends badly. It's just sadly an all too common story. Has financial advice or planning for sports people improved over the years, and did you get any guidance? Because I'm just thinking back to when I was a young man, and I think if I'd achieved even a tenth of what you did, the success would go to my head, and then there would be no interest in planning for the future. So did you get any guidance in that regard?
I didn't get any guidance. There was no guidance for players back then. I think when they started when we as players started to earn decent money. And look, when I first started playing, I remember I was the first guy that actually took over from Alan Border, and my first Australian contract was $25,000 for the year. You'd earn about $500 for a Shield game, and that I started sort of early 90s, and that sort of changed probably late 90s with the advent of paying players. The support mechanisms and networks started to trickle in, and there was certainly some support, counselling, financial advice from certain industries or people that was available, which was great. From my perspective, no. I'm not a huge risk taker. A lot of people that play for Australia in high level sport and high level in their industry are actually probably the opposite. They probably are risk takers. I'm fairly conservative. So for me, I made the decision, and look, without any background or research on performance of property, it was one of my goals just to own a number of properties by the time I finished playing, so I could have the independence and control over my career when I finished. And so at that point in time, I really didn't. I must admit, I bought property early on, probably at the age of maybe 20, maybe 21, I'm not sure, with no idea about how capital gains works or cash flow, but just on the premise that I hoped to pour any income that I had into owning properties so I could earn money off the rent and make a living off that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I knew you had an interest in property, but I guess the interesting thing is you've sort of effectively moved from the ACT to New South Wales. Now, I know a few players who've gone in the other direction. I used to train with a guy, Anthony Stewart, who ended up playing at Canberra, but you've actually come in the other direction. So how did you even know, when you first got into property as a youngster, effectively, how did you even know where and what to buy? How did you even get started out?
I didn't. I had no idea. I bought where I lived. Fortunately, I lived in Manly. I actually bought, I think, around 1991, which I think from memory there might have been a crash around 87 or 89. So I sort of bought my first unit in Manly on a gross yield of about 6%, and continued to sort of buy units in Manly over the course of, the next few years. And, look, I was still pretty conservative, but I had no idea. I remember, no one pointed me in that direction. I went and made a few bids for some properties. So I managed to get a sort of I wouldn't have been a mortgage broker back then, but a bank that, was probably through my accountant that was recommended. And, I remember taking my first mortgage out, being absolutely petrified, and my investment philosophy has changed dramatically. As I said, the cash flow position has changed quite dramatically, and so I would, but there was no strategy other than just buy a property while I was earning decent money. Yeah,
I mean that's a familiar tale. Like a lot of Poms, I lived in Bondi for many years, and I think when I got started in Sydney property, it was basically a case of, well, I like living here. I can get to the city in 10 minutes from the train, close to the beach, but it wasn't a whole lot more sophisticated than that. I think it was basically, well, if I like living here, there's got to be other people that do. But places like Manly and Bondi have always been popular over the years and have done very well. So what have been some of your best and worst decisions in property? Let's start with the best. It's always good to have an optimistic story.
Yeah, there's plenty of bad ones. We have those all day. Well, okay, yeah. Look, I mean, again, it was probably just the first, buying property, I would say, in a premium area over any given period of time, and it just seems to, and so you could characterise that in one of my best decisions is just buying sort of. Good solid property in good areas when I could, and continuing to invest. I did sort of slip away from residential and move into the commercial sector, which is kind of sort of the space I've been in recently. Probably the best decision, one of the best properties I bought was a sort of a blue chip tenanted property with land on the fringes of Newcastle, where the zoning sort of changed from 3-level height to 10-level height with a nice lease of 3.5% rental increases over the course of the lease. So that's been a particularly good performing property. So when you kind of look at sort of capital gains plus increase of rent and overall gains and gross returns, that's been up there for sure. So that's probably been the pick of the investments. And it was actually like I bought it, had no idea I was buying it on the basis or the recommendation of my accountant, who knew agents that sold commercial property, and all his sort of clients bought commercial property and bought it on a really thin yield for where it was, but it hadn't had any rent reviews for about 8 years, and so it's going to be a very good return from a capital growth perspective, and the income derived from it and the yield is exceptionally high. So it's probably been the best one, yeah.
It's a fairly common story that people say, well, actually, the first property they bought in many respects was the most important, partly because it's the longest time you've had in the market. So it allows capital growth and compounding as much time as possible to do its thing. You don't necessarily understand that when you're buying your first property, but it's the time is very powerful, especially in good locations. But of course, you're going to make some mistakes along the way. That's always the case. I guess the key is to keep moving forward, take the good bits and learn from the mistakes and adjust course as you go. So before we talk a little bit about your coaching and equipment business interests, do you have any property plans going forward? Any goals?
My last couple of purchases were commercial based. And as I mentioned to you before, I've sort of switched goals or strategies in terms of the types of properties I want to buy, given my cash flow at the moment. I've actually become probably, when my earning capacity finished after playing cricket, that's when I probably became a better investor. I started looking at the fundamentals of markets and properties, and so I guess the one thing that I'd love to do, and it may not happen now, is that, look, I probably haven't invested as much as I should have, and one of the reasons for that is, I suppose, is I'm sort of resting on my laurels and using the cash flow as, to fund my lifestyle. And whenever you do that, you're probably going to take a back seat and to continuing to grow your portfolio. So the one transition I've never made, and the types of properties I look at now, are sort of mixed-use commercial properties with sort of value add in terms of either rental upside or repositioning or refurb, or markets that I hope are on the precipice of moving or that are sort of recovering. And so I suppose at one point in time I did want to take the leap from becoming a passive investor to an active investor, and sort of creating those value add opportunities and actually implementing sort of improvements, et cetera, et cetera. So that would probably one of my major goals, is even to make the transition from a passive investor to an active investor, and whether it's just putting a unit on something or repositioning it. Yeah, look, I'd like to do that. Whether that happens or not, I'm not too sure.
Do you want to save on buyer's agent fees? You could save thousands with Buyers Buyers. As Australia's most extensive network of buyer's agents, we can lock in highly competitive prices. Plus, our national network of buyer's agents are some of the best in the business. So get the Buyers Buyers advantage and talk to us today. Call 1-800-975-051 or visit buyersbuyers.com.au.
Let's talk a bit about your coaching. I know you've done some coaching in India previously. So I think back to my cricketing days as a struggling club cricketer, and I never had to face Shoaib Akhtar in a semi-final or Devon Malcolm on a quick deck. But the thing I always struggled with largely was the mental side of the game. You get some runs one week and go out and celebrate with 1,000 drinks, but then the next week you get a first baller and then get depressed about everything, and just the lack of self-belief. And it seems to me, when I'm observing from the outside, that the most successful players, they seem to be more level-headed. They don't get too up or too down. I used to play with Alistair Cook in England. He just never seemed to faze him. Going from one level up to test level, playing the Ashes, just always the same kind of mentality. And I would have loved to have somebody as a coach just to say, like, this is, you've got it's all about the preparation and your self-belief and all of the points that you cover in your online content. So tell us a bit about Batting Mentor, and also about what you do in the equipment side of the game, because obviously that's important too.
All those questions and issues that you're sort of bringing up now, that doesn't change whether you're a high level player or lower level player. Consistency is always the issue, and it's amazing how much less you stress about your game when you actually have a clear plan and an understanding of what things contribute to performance and what you have to do. And I think clarity in some respects precedes confidence, and it's very hard to have that self-belief unless you have the clarity of what approach you have and whether it works. And so that's the way I sort of felt for me, is that I probably stressed out in the first part of my career, and then the second part, when I understood why I scored runs and how to score runs, you just really de-stress, and you just kind of think, all right, well, even though I got 0 or got 10 today, look, I know when in my next innings, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. And so for me, I suppose in terms of the batting mentor and coaching per se as well, to me, it kind of forms a large part of my coaching ethos and ideology. And I guess the reason why it was born, and it's purely speculative, I have no idea how well it'll go or who'll be interested in it, but the reason why it was born was because, look, I had coached previously for team coaching and done pretty well. And look, I don't absolutely love it, but I know I can coach pretty well when there's an opportunity. And so sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. But the thing for me is I was really confused as a young player as about what I was trying to achieve and how to do it. And so it's the mentoring part that I really love. And it's the mentoring part that's hard. I mean, I don't actually enjoy coaching players to play cover drives. I actually enjoy coaching and mentoring players around sort of mindset, game plans, confidence, and all these aspects that need to happen for players to become consistent. So that's the exciting part. So I sort of developed this product around a couple of things: what I love doing, what I felt would really help, and two, what I could potentially scale. And then the sort of the equipment side of things was really an add-on that I hoped would be sort of a point of difference in the market from a business perspective. Sort of as it's turned out, the equipment side, where I'm sort of have developed my own range of cricket equipment called the Finisher in conjunction with Kingsbury Cricket, has probably turned out to be there's been a little bit more demand for it and a little bit more successful. So, look, it could well get to the point where rather than offering coaching services and mentoring services with the equipment as an add-on, I could offer probably equipment, and then, for people that buy the Finisher brand equipment, they'll get access to free mentoring from Michael Bevan. And so hopefully that might be, again, just a point of difference in the market that I can sort of establish over, other ranges or products or competitors. So, we'll see where that takes me in due course.
Yes, I think, obviously a strong recommendation. I wrote a piece recently. Somebody asked me to write a piece about my cricketing journey, even as a lowly club player. And I think one of the things I found when I came to Sydney, the importance of repetition, quality of practice, but also the importance of preparation and the mental side of the game. I had a couple of guys, Kyle Thompson and Michael McLennan, they're just endlessly throwing balls at me, but also saying just focus on the next ball. The mental side of the game is so important. So if people want to get in contact or find out more about Batting Mentor, and we can put some stuff in the show notes, where should they go to find out more?
battingmentor.com.
It's as simple as that, but we'll put a link in the show notes for you as well, so you can track it down. And I think there's a free ebook you can download there, and all the information on how you can get in contact for more. Now, Michael, I did plan here to have a question on the Ashes, but I've just drawn a thick red line through that question because as a POM, I don't necessarily want to hear anything more about cricket for the next couple of years. So, yes, disappointing summer for the British tourists, but next time we'll hopefully have some revenge. So, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to interview a player and person of your calibre. So thank you so much, and speak to you again soon.
Yes, thanks, mate. Much appreciated.
Thanks for listening to Pete's Property Podcast. powered by Buyers Buyers. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next time as Pete chats all things property with a new guest. And just a reminder that the information provided in this podcast is general advice only and doesn't take into account your personal financial situation or needs. You should always consult a licensed professional to discuss your individual personal circumstances.